Hello and welcome back to Voyage of a Time Wanderer. Today I am here to talk about 5 Canadian authors that I love and would like to read more by. So in honor of Canada Day, I thought it would be fun to talk about some of my favorite Canadian authors that I have only read 1 or 2 books by and that I would love to read more of in the future because these books are some of my all-time favorite books. They're written by Canadians, yet there's so much more of their catalog that I still have to explore. So the first author I want to talk about is Vincent Lam. His book, The Headmaster's Wager, was one of my favorite reads of 2017, and it tells the story of the Chinese diaspora in Vietnam during the Vietnamese War. And this is something that Vincent has personal knowledge of because his parents were members of the Chinese diaspora in Vietnam before they immigrated to Canada. So this book, The Headmaster's Wager, tells the story of a man and his family, and he runs a Chinese language school in the Vietnamese capital. And so we see his perspective on the events of the Vietnamese War, and it's an interesting story because as a member of the Chinese diaspora, he's kind of removed from being on either the side of the Americans or of the Vietnamese. So it's this interesting third-party perspective on the events of the war. I still think about this book all the time, and I think it was just brilliantly written. Lam is actually a doctor by profession. He worked in an emergency room for many years, so he hasn't actually written all too many books. But he does have one collection of short stories called Bloodletting and Miraculous Cures that is loosely based on his experiences in medical school and as an emergency room doctor. And despite the fact that I don't typically like medical fiction, this book did have quite high praise. Given that this is his only other piece of fiction and how much I enjoyed The Headmaster's Wager, I'm very curious to see how he writes contemporary fiction and whether or not I could enjoy some medical fiction. The second author I want to talk about is Laurence Hill, and he actually wrote one of my all-time favorite books, The Book of Negroes, which is a historical fiction book about the experience of Black loyalists who were evacuated during the American Revolution to Nova Scotia, Canada, and then some of them carried on and ended up establishing Sierra Leone and being quite active in the abolitionist movement. So Laurence Hill is also from Ontario, Canada, and he is a Black Canadian author. His parents were in an interracial relationship and immigrated from America to Canada, and Hill writes quite a bit about the Black Canadian experience and the experience of Canadians of mixed race descent. So he's written quite a bit of both nonfiction and fiction. One of the books that I'm particularly excited about, I just picked this one up at my library. It was in the used book bin for only $2, and that is Any Known Blood. And this book sounds particularly fascinating to me because it kind of has a genealogy bend to it. So just to read the flap of this book, Langston Kane V is 38, divorced and childless, and has just been fired for sabotaging a government official's speech. The eldest son of a white mother and a prominent Black father, Langston feels more acutely than ever the burden of his illustrious family name. After a run-in with his father in Oakville, Langston takes off for Baltimore, where he embarks on a remarkable quest to uncover his family's past and his own sense of self. At the home of his feisty Aunt Mill, Langston finds boxes crammed with family documents. With these, he sets out to reconstruct the lives of his ancestors, beginning with his own parents' struggle against segregation in Canada and moving back in time to the story of his great-great-grandfather, a supposed hero in John Brown's famous anti-slavery raid on Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Langston discovers the long line of relatives in constant battle for their rights and dignity. So it's an intergenerational family story that sounds absolutely beautiful, and I'm sure this could be a new favorite as well. Hill has also written an autobiography called Blackberry Sweet Juice on being Black and white in Canada, and as someone in an interracial relationship who will one day hopefully have mixed-race children, I think this would be an important book for me to have read. So Laurence Hill is definitely a Canadian author that I would love to read more by. The next Canadian author that I love and would love to read more by is Margaret Laurence. She is from Manitoba, Canada, and her book, The Stone Angel, is one of my favorite reading memories from high school. The Stone Angel follows Hagar Shipley, who is an elderly woman whose family is having to make the difficult decision to move her into an old folks' home. And we follow her as she grapples with this decision and has flashbacks through her life story. And this book is set in a fictional town called Manawaka, Manitoba, and it actually turns out that she has 5 books that are loosely interconnected that are all set in this town. And I would love to carry on and read these other 4 books in her Manawaka series because I think she writes very interestingly about the role of women in society and the impact of memory as people age. A lot of her books are grappling with ordinary women looking back on the events of their life and coming to terms with their past, their present, and their future. The fourth author is one you will have heard me talk about quite a bit on this channel, and that is Emily St. John Mandel. She is from British Columbia, Canada, and was actually homeschooled, so we have two things in common. I have read Station 11 and The Glass Hotel, which are her two most recent books, but she has three previous books, Last Night in Montreal, The Singer's Gun, and the Lola Quartet, which I have not read, and given how deeply moved I am by her writing style, I think all three of these could potentially be new favorite books, and I would love to continue on reading through her back catalog. One Night in Montreal sounds particularly interesting to me because I have visited Montreal, and it is a beautiful city, and I would love to read a fictional story set there. And then finally, the fifth Canadian author that I want to talk about today is almost a cheat answer because some websites call her an Irish author, but she's been living in Canada since the mid-1990s, so I think that also qualifies her as a Canadian author, and that is Emma Donoghue. I had seen talk of Emma Donoghue on Booktube and in different literary spaces ever since The Room was published, I believe in 2010, but I had kind of not paid any attention to her until I recently read The Pull of the Stars, which is her most recent novel, which is set in a maternity ward during the Spanish flu in Ireland. And I was really blown away by how immersive a reading experience this was, and it definitely made me want to read more of her books in the future. In particular, I would love to pick up The Wonder soon, which follows a young girl in Ireland who claims that she is living on manna from heaven and no longer needs sustenance to eat. So the village people surrounding her are convinced that this is a miracle, and a nurse is sent into this rural community to investigate and try to determine what is the scientific explanation behind what is occurring here. So I think that mix of historical fiction with a bit of a theological bend is right up my alley and is definitely a book that I might really enjoy. So those are the 5 Canadian authors who I have read and loved, yet have a large back catalog that I have not yet fully explored. So hopefully I will have a chance in the coming years to investigate these Canadian authors more thoroughly and read some of the other amazing books that they have written. I would love to know who your favorite Canadian authors are. I'm always looking to read more Canadian fiction because it's easy for me to read primarily American or British fiction and not have too many books that I actually read set in my own country. So very curious to know who your favorite Canadian authors are, and looking forward to reading more canlit in my future. Until next time, enjoy wandering through the pages of a good book.